there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world.
Ајде, мајката!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
It is officially springtime in Macedonia and the Northern Hemisphere, but not as the producers envisioned it for Hitler nor Germany, as the song goes. And as this beleaguered old world celebrates springtime and autumn in the Southern Hemisphere, that world, once again, finds itself on a type of precipice. But before we get to that, the advent of springtime also means that the results of the Macedonian census are about to be released. What shenanigans can we expect with those numbers? Will the arrogant and brash football hooligan turned politician Artan Grubi do a victory dance? And will the Bulgarians demand, well, more, quote, Bulgarians, unquote, in Macedonia? Because it is Bulgaria, after all, that is the current EU country of the day, holding Macedonia hostage to the start of EU accession talks. But not to fear! EU Foreign Policy Supremo Josip Borrell was recently in Macedonia to talk about this very subject, reminding Macedonians that they must come to a, quote, mutually acceptable, unquote, agreement with Bulgaria on certain sensitive subjects. Now, gosh golly gee whiz, where and when have we heard those two words together before? We'll discuss all of this and more in this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin in Skopje, Macedonia.
How you doing, Cvetin?
Yeah, a bit tired, a lot of work, but not complaining.
Springtime coming?
Yeah,
Good.
Very rapidly, actually.
Excellent. It's always better.
Still cold, but we should turn the corner around this week.
Good, and I know you do your daylight savings time this coming weekend. We're recording this episode 134 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast on, let's see, what is today? Monday, March 21. So most of this country changed their clocks last week, and Europe changes your clocks next week. And we in Arizona don't change our clocks at all because we are on God's time all the time. So, well, good. That'll change our schedule here in these podcasts. But it's always better for the people, I think, when there's a little more light later in the day and things warm up, and at least there's something to be hopeful about in this, as I called it, this beleaguered old world.
Because the year is off to not a great start.
Yes, I can't remember. We did do predictions, I think, at the end of 2021 about 2022. I'd have to go back and
did you mention something about nuclear holocaust?
Jason, why do you laugh so easily at that? They all asked. Well, because you kind of have to. So at times. So.
Yeah. What's the alternative?
Exactly. Yes. But springtime. So again, this is March 21. So March 30. So next week, the census results will be released. Do we have any hint? I'm sure we got hints, but are there any leaks? I mean, come on, man. People want to know. Our listeners want to know. They demand information. What do you know?
Yeah, there's going to be like a large event in the Philharmonic Hall, the newly built oval-shaped concert hall in Skopje. By the Statistics Bureau, they're holding like a concert, a gathering, a fiesta, to reveal the data from the census, which was very controversial from the start because for the first time we are formally counting the immigrants as among the residents. This was a key demand from the Albanians, who feared that their numbers will be much reduced as a percentage of population if we don't count the Albanians who have left Macedonia and emigrated to Europe. So it's from the start it was widely expected that there is going to be a mess. The Albanian diaspora massively participated, while the Macedonian diaspora does not really want to have all that much to do with this country at the moment under this current government and administration. So they boycotted the census. And there will be a significant change in the percentages, which last time around, again in another controversial census, after the war in 2001, we had 25% Albanians against 67, 18% Macedonians. This will definitely change now, and we all expect it will be to have the Albanian numbers inflated, but we'll see by how much. And the head of the Statistics Bureau, who was threatening citizens not to boycott the census because it was taking time in a very nasty way of the pandemic. A few days ago, he said, "Okay, I know I will be the hate figure for the entire country after the results come out on the 30th." But this is the numbers. We just do statistics, like it's not a political thing. So he practically announced that there will be some very unhappy, unsatisfied parties with the census. Albanian politicians are, pulling numbers out of their hats. They say like 35% Albanians, 45% Macedonians, with a large share of Bulgarians. But this is like pure speculation. We don't know if anything, the Bulgarians were angry that their push to have as many Macedonians rediscover their Bulgarian roots is not proceeding as well as they hoped, and there were media reports in Bulgaria that that they're angry that so few people are counting themselves as Bulgarians in the census. And from anecdotal evidence, I've also heard this, that there would be like a minuscule number of Bulgarians in the census, but this is what was allegedly reported by the people. If there will be some massaging of the numbers in this very long period of analyzing of the data, which took like half a year, which is really
Suspicious.
incredible. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. In less than a week, we'll know whether what direction we're taking. The U.S. Embassy very strongly pushed for the census to take place in the middle of the corona wave, and with concerns that were raised in the public. So this will likely be a pointer in the future direction of Macedonia, about which we've discussed often here, that it's probably grim and we don't know where the country is heading, and this might be an important milestone on this path.
Oh, come on, man. I was just trying to talk about springtime and daylight savings time and people being a little more optimistic and hopeful, and you just go and
then
crap on it.
And then you
right
switch
there.
to demographics. I mean, nowhere are demographics a laughing matter, but especially here.
Yeah. Well, again, the whole point of a census anywhere is to count the number of people in a given location at a moment in time. It is not to count the people who are outside the country. So to your point that this is what the ethnic Albanian leadership minority in Macedonia demanded, should have been resisted. No surprise that the government caved in, because the government citizen is of the left and doesn't believe in things like doesn't strongly believe, I should say, in things like nationhood, statehood, identity, etc. Plus, they're pressured by, as you mentioned, the U.S. Embassy and other embassies from the EU nations. Now, of course, Macedonia had not had a census since 2002, 2002, I think, 20 years essentially by the time these results come out. But still, if you're going to do a census, you got to do it right. And two things: holding it during the middle of Corona, and then acquiescing, making yourself subservient, whatever you want to call it, to the demands of the Albanians. Of course, I hope that when the numbers come out, that we do know what those numbers are, how many people were actually in Macedonia during, counted in the census, and how many were outside of Macedonia, because to my mind, at least, those would be the official numbers. So, but yeah, this is the next big issue vis-a-vis Macedonia that we can look forward to debating and being angry over, etc. Longer term, maybe this is a subject for another podcast another time. Longer term, what do you do about that? How do you get Macedonians to come back? How do you encourage, frankly, ethnic Albanians to leave.
No, we're doing very well on encouraging everybody to leave, not just ethnic Albanians.
Everybody to leave. It's an equal opportunity program.
Bringing somebody back here, usually is followed by what the heck is wrong with you? Or actually, in my case, my favorite part was when I asked an Albanian who was doing some work for me. He said, "Well, I lived in Switzerland," and like, "Are you crazy? Why did you come back?" And I quickly regretted this as I realized from his face that he actually had done something in the country where he was, that he had not much choice to come back. I said, okay, no more questions. I'm just finished the job and I'm off.
Yeah. Well, and and as you mentioned, the Bulgarian side of this whole census, obviously the Bulgarian government, past government, the current government, has been handing out passports like candy to anybody who will declare themselves to have some relative in the past that was a Bulgarian, and they do that, of course, because Macedonians, and I'm sure they do this in other countries, want to have EU membership or be able to have a passport that allows them to go into EU at work, etc. So the Bulgarians are going to demand that whatever that actual number is, and nobody really knows what it is, that all those people be counted as Bulgarians in Macedonia. But I think I had seen numbers some time ago that the number of people who actually declared themselves as ethnic Bulgarians in the census was far less than even 1,000, maybe a few hundred. I don't know. But
there will be a few thousand, I'm sure, but not more than that. I doubt more than that.
All right. Well, we'll know next week. But that then leads us back to Bulgaria. As I mentioned in the monologue, Josip Borrell, the EU foreign policy supremo, was there last week saying that you have to have agreed a mutually acceptable. There must be a mutually acceptable agreement between Macedonia and Bulgaria, which means you got to give in to Bulgaria's demands. The Prime Minister Kirill Petkov today was talking to the Greek newspaper Kathamanini that absolutely will support Macedonia, but they've got to agree to all our demands. And then I see the Prime Minister Kovachevsky has said that yes, we're making good progress on agreeing to those demands, and we'll let you know after we've agreed to those demands what those demands were and what we agreed to give away. So it's the same old story. It's the same movie. We've seen this 1,000 times.
I don't know what to expect here anymore. I mean, there's been initially optimistic comments from Petkov that he will wrap this all up by June. And then he was quickly shut down. He told this, I don't know, the Financial Times or The Economist, something like that. And then he was quickly shut down by the President Radev, by his Bulgarian Socialist Party coalition partner. And of course, he also has the Slavi Trifonov people in his coalition. So it's a big mess of a coalition there. So then they had a number of meetings with Kovachevsky. Everything was looking rosy. Afterwards, Bulgarian people started talking, officials started talking about the lack of any progress other than, on the political issues, other than the declared good intentions. So we don't know. June is approaching. The EU has these summits every 6 months, and this time it's going to be all about Ukraine, obviously. So whether Ukraine gets the, the candidacy status, well, we don't even get the accession talks date after being a candidate for so long. It's a possibility. It's possible that some deal will be made in which, some demands are met at outright by Kovachevsky, and the rest are lined up. So something that apparently Kovachevsky was also offering to the EU was that we agree as a country that the demand from Bulgaria that we amend the constitution and name the Bulgarian nation or minority as part of the preamble, as one of the constituent nations of Macedonia, that this is made part of the EU accession process in Macedonia, so that the pressure no longer comes from Bulgaria, but from the EU as a whole. And any other government, a future VMRO government, would not be able to avoid this. And Kovacevsky does not have the numbers at the moment to do this. Vimera said, okay, we'll accept this, but we want a written guarantee from the EU that this will be the last demand, and nobody's giving anything like that, because obviously there will be many more demands in the future. And now we're stuck, we're in a worsening rhetoric over Ukraine, because it was very quickly noticed that what Putin says about Ukraine, that it's a country made up by Lenin, by the Communist International, that it was never an actual country, that they were all Russians and spoke Russian through their history. It's very similar to what Bulgarians are saying on Macedonia. And a number of Macedonian officials said this. So on one hand, the left SDSM drones, they're very anti-Russian. They're trying to endear themselves to the U.S. embassy here, which put them in power in the first place. So they're saying things along these lines that look the demands Russia makes of Ukraine. They're very similar to the Bulgarian demands of us. Ergo, we should support Ukraine. Then Alexander Nikolovsky from Vimera made the same comparison, that you cannot deny a nation, its history, its origin. You cannot claim it's part of your nation unless, it will lead obviously to territorial claims. So Bulgaria even launched a formal protest through the foreign ministry that we must stop making this comparison. So it applies both to Vimera officials and to journalists, Twitterati from SDSM, and even some very close to the embassy who were coming out with this position in their attempt to get Macedonians to support the pro-American side, the Ukrainian side in the war. So, but obviously Bulgaria now strongly resents this comparison.
Yeah, and really when you take a step back and kind of look at this whole situation in as dispassionately as is humanly possible, it is a complete jumble. Left is right and right is left and up is down and down is up, and it's just kind of sometimes it's hard to fathom. I mean, I would look at it as not a situation of supporting the Americans or supporting the EU, but my God in heaven, the Ukrainians are literally being shot to death. Children are being bombed. Elderly are being starved to death or killed. There's just absolute carnage and destruction going on throughout Ukraine, and you don't have to say you're pro-US or pro-EU or anti-Russia. The poor Ukrainians are literally dying as we are recording this podcast. Men, women, and children, innocent ones, and their cities are being leveled to the ground. And that's the issue here. And now I know there are some people who would say that the Bulgarians should simply surrender. Well, as it turns out, the idea of freedom and liberty and sovereignty is kind of important to the Ukrainians. I believe it's important to the Macedonians. I've spent 26 years of my life talking about this and how that the sovereignty and nationhood and the identity of the Macedonians is important. I think it's interesting here. I was just reading this Katamarini article with Kirill Petkov, the Bulgarian prime minister, and apparently Moscow asked for NATO to withdraw from Bulgaria and Romania, and Kirill Petkov said, quote, "I do not like the idea of anyone telling us what we should and should not do. We are an independent state and we can make our own choices." Yeah, I agree with him. That applies to every other nation state as well. And so Macedonia should be able to decide whether or not it wants to change its name. Ukraine should be able to decide whether or not it wants to join the EU, which is going back to 2014. And they can certainly decide if they want to be a sovereign independent nation state and fight to the death, apparently. Which is what they're doing. So I would hope that people would be able to take a look and say, I'm supporting Ukraine not because I'm pro EU or US, because Ukrainians are dying and that's wrong. And Vladimir Putin should not be, should never have engaged in this war in the first place. I mean, there are, and I get it. I've been following, and of course, let me caveat this whole thing by saying, Twitter is not real life. We all know that. Majority of people in civilized countries are not on Twitter. It is a cesspool. It's also a good source of information if you know what to look for and you know how to use it. It's a tool. And so, I follow, certain folks on Twitter from the Macedonian side, but that doesn't represent the entire sum of opinion in Macedonia. Just as in America, if you follow anybody who's an American that's on Twitter, you can't base any real descriptions about the country or the people based on how people tweet. Twitter in America is very leftist, as we all know. But I get the frustration and the anger that Macedonians have in this whole situation, and I get the accusations leveled against the United States of the wrongs that the United States has committed. I mean, my goodness, our original sin was slavery. We also did something about it. We fought a war, and hundreds of thousands of Americans, brothers shot at brothers, and fathers shot at sons, and sons shot at fathers on, being on both sides of the divide, and died to get rid of slavery, and we're still working on it. Now Afghanistan was a war of necessity, not a choice. There's two wars. Wars of choice, wars of necessity. It was a war of necessity. We said to the government in Afghanistan, hand over Osama bin Laden after 9/11. They didn't. We invaded. Stayed too long, in my opinion. I think most Americans agree. Most Americans wanted to leave, but we didn't want to leave the way we did, which was a humiliation. I think we all agree on that. Iraq, I'm on record. It was wrong to go in Iraq. We didn't need to go in there. They never had weapons of mass destruction. Colin Powell, God rest his soul, said, he was very uncomfortable saying that at that UN Security Council meeting. So all that to say that the U.S. has made many, many mistakes, and we're not in a war with in Ukraine right now. We're doing what every other country on the planet does and has done throughout all of history, which is sell or give weapons and support and things like that to others. Plus, under the UN Charter, Ukraine has the right to ask for assistance. That's a fact, even though they're not a member of NATO or the EU. But going back, and I'm kind of on a long rambling rant right now. Going back to this whole thing and how Macedonians feel about it and things like that, and I think the desire of some in the Twitter sphere to see the United States kind of pummeled in this whole thing, although you can't really pummel a giant like that. On balance, on whole, I think the United States has been good for humanity. It's done more good than evil. Now, I'm happy to have that debate with people who disagree with me. I'd love to have that debate with people who disagree with me. But I think, Elon Musk was born in South Africa, and he came to the United States. He didn't go to Russia. There's a reason for that. I'm done.
Oh, wow. Yeah. What were we talking about?
Sorry, we were taking as kind of a step back and looking at, it started with the whole idea of Bulgarians denying the identity of Macedonians, and compared that and said that Macedonia is a creation of Tito, and compared that with what Vladimir Putin has said about Lenin and the Ukrainians. I mean, you want to talk about a nation-building project? We all joke about that and complain about that in terms of how the U.S. and the EU, especially the U.S., runs around trying to do nation-building projects. Well, Vladimir Putin in 4 weeks has done an incredible nation-building project for Ukrainians. They are more solidified in their identity as Ukrainians than ever before, I would venture. And the even if the war ended right now, the anger between Ukrainians and Russians will last for generations.
Yeah.
Decades.
Yeah, of course. We saw it in Yugoslavia. Well, I told you we should have done a fully Ukraine podcast again. No point talking anything else, except especially now that there's really not all that much happening in Macedonia at the moment. Everything is on hold. Even Mitskovsky said he's suspending the possibility of protests until Ukraine lasts. And the main other stories like the gas prices and fuel shortages are again, and food shortages they're not shortages, but there is like panic buys are linked to Ukraine. I mean, I guess.
So there are. So
Sorry?
yeah. Sorry. No, actually that's a good. Let's talk about that a little bit. I know we didn't mention it in our discussions before the podcast, but yeah. I mean, every country. Number one, even before the war, there was inflation, and that was a result, I think, in many countries, especially here, of too much money chasing too few goods, and that too much money came from the government in our case. But inflation is at its highest peak here in over 40 years, and inflation's going on around the world. But yeah, the Ukraine situation hasn't helped that. And then you've got issues like I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, and I haven't looked them up yet. But Ukraine and Russia produce a hell of a lot of wheat for the world.
Yeah.
And Ukrainian farmers should have been planting at the beginning of March. Obviously, they haven't done that. The sad thing about this whole thing is that the countries that are going to get hurt most in the fall are African countries and other third world countries who import their wheat from Ukraine.
I was just looking at some numbers that actually, it's the Ukrainian and Russian exports put together are minuscule compared to the American production that goes to ethanol. So yeah, I mean there is enough to go around. That's something you guys could divert immediately. I think only the amount that goes to corn syrup would be enough to feed the world. But yeah, there are it happens every few days that we have reports, pictures from a supermarket that there is lack of flour, especially the large commercial sizes packs, and cooking oil gets because Ukraine is huge on sunflower seeds So yeah, we get that. We had spikes of gas prices, and then even calls to boycott, like the second or the third largest chain in the country of petrol stations, which is Lukoil. A call for boycott from the foreign minister, no less. And there was like a protest against this, and like pro-Russian minor politicians would go and deliberately pump fuel at this gas station. So the prices are now brought down by a reduction in the tax. But it's a very, very difficult situation. The energy crisis has gotten worse with the war, because the little gas we import is very important for heating the country. So for a few more weeks we'll still be in the danger zone with heating. So yeah, it's
but springtime, going back to what we started, springtime is coming.
Yeah. We still need it for electricity. We still need Russia for electricity, but yeah, I guess they lose their strategic advantage in a few months. I mean, they're still important in supplying Germany with gas for the electricity and other needs, but yeah, I suppose consumption will drop. So yeah,
but doesn't this speak to, though? I mean, again, taking a step back, the need for leaders in Macedonia, right, left, center, whatever, to sit down and at least on these big issues to sit down and come to an agreement on how do we become a little bit more self-sufficient, or how do we source whatever we import, foodstuffs, energy, etc. How do we source it from more diverse countries, or many more countries, so we don't have to depend on any one or two in particular? These are big long-term issues that I think the government, the leaders, should address if they could just set aside their petty differences, because those affect everybody.
Listen, we've been practically under U.S. control since 1999, when the U.S. intervened in Kosovo and actually took it over. And we have all, the Russians made their incursion to the Pristina airport, left a few days later, and we all understood that we are now under the U.S. Patronage, tutelage, whatever. This was affirmed in Macedonia in 2001. And since then, we've been sitting here waiting for investments. The US is fabulously cash rich. We are some kind of like an investment opportunity, growing market, nothing compared to China or the size of, let's say, Ukraine or Russia, places that American businesses covet. But still, we are now under the umbrella of the US, and we expected money for highways. We expected that the US has strategic designs for the region that will include pipelines. Remember how often, poor Tashkovich would go around telling us he has an oil pipeline going through Macedonia lined up. It was a major story in Macedonian newspapers every few months. We would write about the Ambo pipeline, etc. And nothing ever happened. In fact, I was pretty sure that the American businesses lined up building a coal plant in Kosovo, which they have owned since '99, entirely, like lock, stock, and barrel. It's an American province, and there was a lot of resistance because it's coal, it's hurting Mother Nature, and poor Kosovars were still having on and off power cuts because there is no proper electricity supply. So I assumed that this resistance to building this project was broken, and they started working on this like a few years ago. Last thing I had heard about this unfortunate power plant project was that it's lined up and it will replace the aging existing plants, add new capacity, and make Kosovo, as you say, self-sufficient. And now when we started having the current ongoing energy crisis, I spoke to somebody from Kosovo. I say, hey, what happened? How far along are you with the plant that the Americans were supposed to finance and build for you? And he says, oh no, it was stopped like years ago. No, again, with the green stuff, we're not working on this. Now we are, again, have all this coal and nothing is happening. So we tried, we hoped for, we sided with the West, we hoped for infrastructure, let's say EU money for roads and railways on a non-commercial basis, because it's not worth building them commercially on our demographics. And we hoped for American commercial loans and a strategic vision for energy in the region. And nothing happened. Our only serious offers are coming from China in highways and railways, and this is being these people coming to make these offers are being kicked out of the country by the Americans, who do not then offer an alternative, or if there is an alternative to the Chinese highway funds, it comes in the shape of Bechtel, and we still don't have the number how much their project is going to cost us for 2.5 highways in Macedonia, but I'm sure it's going to be 2 or 3 times more than the Chinese were offering, with much worse repayment deals. We did not get an energy security offer for the region from the US. We are only now having this idea to build an LNG plant terminal in Greece, which will hook us to Greece. I mean, strategically for us, it's between the Russians and the Greeks, who would control my energy. I don't know what to tell you. And instead of the US funding this, as Macedonia, we're asked to fund a project in Greece, an American-sponsored project in Greece, to give like at least a quarter of the funding. So I don't know what to tell you. It's really not, the US has not really been a prudent landowner here in this part of the world. And this is why, I'm not even going into the picking favorites in the ethnic divisions here, in the ethnic tapestry we have, and picking favorites in the political side, siding with one political faction against the other, consistently siding with one against the other. So it's, we were Americans to lose, and as a people, as a country, as hearts and minds, etc. And the U.S. actually worked very hard to achieve this and lose us.
Yeah, you make some good points there. Although I'll kick it back a little bit and say that ultimately it is the decision of leaders in Macedonia to either accept or reject those demands, requests, and treaties, whatever you want to call them, from whether it's the U.S. or the EU or any other country. And because of the government of the past 5 years in Macedonia, Citizen Dewey, that's why these things have happened, because those individual leaders have agreed to do those things, even when it is against the will of the people. Obviously, case in point being, of course, the name change. So I would put it in their. I'd place the primary blame with the leadership there on these things. I mean, we can go back to talk about the previous government for Citizen, which Vomero under Nikola Gruevski. You can fault Nikola Gruevski for a lot of things, but I think everybody, Macedonians, would objectively agree that life was better when he was there, because he did stand up in many ways, not all the time, but he did stand up, and he did have a vision, and so and then we can relitigate the whole issue of how the Citizen got into power, etc. But at the same time, I think we need to look at, okay, that's been done. How do we get rid of them now? And I think Miskolsky should be out in the streets protesting. I think he should do whatever he can to try and bring down the government.
The embassy won't let him. He actually says that the embassy won't let him.
He said that?
Yeah.
Where did he say that?
He was on television. He was asked, okay, you said protests in spring. What happens? And he said, well, look, you see, there is this war in Ukraine, and if we do this, we will be seen by the international factors as we are destabilizing the country, and they will not look kindly on it. I mean, there was just, this morning there was like satirical articles, even days after he made the statement, it's still making news. He was being mocked in public by, another lapdog of the U.S. embassy.
Well, I'll have to go back and quote Kirill Petkov, the prime minister next door. I do not like the idea of anyone telling us what we should and should not do. We are an independent state. We make our own choices. I mean, it's up to Mizko to decide if he wants to go out and protest or
but
not.
even
He doesn't have to listen to the U.S. embassy.
Petkov just had his predecessor arrested. He couldn't wait to replace the prosecutor in the country. They had Boyko Borisov charged and briefly detained. No sympathy here for Borisov. He did tremendous damage to Macedonian and Bulgarian relations with the veto policy. But he was arrested not on a Bulgarian prosecutor's order, but on order of a prosecutor appointed by the EU. And for Petkov, this is a huge success. He could have waited for 6 more months or something to replace the prosecutor, who's obviously Borisov's crony, and would not charge him if his life depended on it. But to go the other way and have a prosecutor parachuted in from Brussels and charging your predecessor helping you out in the political fight. After all, we know here in Macedonia about how the West, when the West comes around, like the Johannes Hans of this world, European commissioners, and the American diplomats and ambassadors come here and select your prosecutor, who is then used to tailor the government to the choosing of the West, or mention Ukraine fighting for its sovereignty. But there is again this video of Biden saying, "Well, by golly, we replaced their prosecutor with another guy," while his son was raking in millions in contracts in Ukraine.
Yeah,
it's not really a sovereign country. I mean, I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's that whole thing, the Biden connection in the past, etc. Is we could have a week's worth of podcast on that probably, but that's actually right now there's bigger issues. All right, well we'll have another podcast on debating whether or not
Macedonia, and then we're off to Ukraine.
Whether Macedonia is a sovereign country. Let's do this. We're running about 38 minutes here so far. I need to finish up a few things, get to work. But we wanted to talk about, because talked about it, I think briefly, or emailed about it, about the Yanni Cinto.
Oh, yeah.
What's going on with the quote unquote April 27 prisoners, and so he was quoted as saying, so two of the so-called colorful revolutionaries that tried to burn down President Ivanov's office in 2016 were given, were they let off or given lighter sentences?
Suspended sentence, I think like
Suspended.
6 months in prison, suspended over a few years.
Right, okay. Even though they set fire to his office, which was at the bottom of an apartment building with residents, with men, women, children, could have turned out much worse. Fortunately, it didn't, whereas those that participated in the so-called April 27th incident were given 15-year sentences.
Yeah.
No, I'm very, very sympathetic to Yanni Cinto, the great-grandson. And he said, I think he said that the goal of citizen is to instill, here's a quote, instill fear in the public and to, quote, break the Macedonian spirit. Sadly, they succeeded in this, unquote.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wish he hadn't said that, but because I would like to think, I hope, I pray, the Macedonian spirit is unbreakable, and that, given the past and what all that Macedonia has been through these past 30 years as a modern-day independent nation state, and then for the many centuries or before that of Macedonia as a people, as a nation, fighting for independence, striving, sacrificing, dying for an independent Macedonian state, all of those men and women that came before, their spirit, they may have died, but their spirit wasn't broken. So how do we instill that spirit in today's Macedonians?
I mean, Yanni is definitely the best example here of this fighting spirit. The great-grandson, as you said, of Macedonia's first president after the war, practically a partisan leader, a guerrilla leader, Metodiandon of Cinto, who was persecuted by the communists. And it's obviously clear that Yanni was arrested by the SDSM, the heirs of the communists, because of his last name and because of they wanted to send out a message that we did this once, we'll do it again, we'll control the country by whatever means necessary. And he was sentenced to 15 years for the incident in the parliament, the storming of the parliament, in which I think he kicked Zaev once or twice. This was tried as terrorism. And obviously the case was perverted to the point that it was used to ensnare 3 members of parliament from Vemero, whose votes were important later in the imposed name change, and who were then released after they voted for the name change, while in the meantime the mere participants in the protests were given these draconic sentences. And from the mobs of SDSM protesters during the Colored Revolution, practically, all of them who were quite close to the U.S. Embassy or SDSM, they were, nobody was charged, really. For this, one of the worst days, there were maybe like 1 or 2 other protests that compared to what they did to President Ivanov's office, to the torching of the office. So I think 6 people in total were charged, and these are like, one of them was a prominent political activist, but he didn't fit either with SDSM or with Levica or any other more established group, so he's kind of like a loose cannon in the whole thing. So he was eventually charged. Nobody was there to vouch or to pressure the government and the prosecutors to drop charges against him, so he remained in this case, and another little-known person, and they got the suspended sentences. So, and they're okay. They're rightfully saying, "Listen, there were hundreds of people with us. Why are only we being charged?" And others who are more, closer to SDSM, they were not. They had the charges dropped. So they have the right to complain that they got a raw deal by the judiciary, while Yanni Cinto absolutely, and the other dozen clearly political prisoners. These include former Interior Minister Miko and other police officers who were sentenced for not sending the police quickly enough, allegedly, to disperse the protests. This had all the chances of having people killed on either side. And there is another travesty here. So one of the persons sentenced in this trial, the only ethnic Albanian in the group, he received a pardon. So this guy was not a policeman, but a member of the parliament guard, like a security detail of the parliament. And he was sentenced to 7 years, I think, in prison. And an Albanian politician who was badly beaten, the one major incident in the storming of the parliament, he claimed that this policeman protected him to help him out. None of these people should be in prison, at least not anymore. I mean, how many years have passed? Any reasonable sentence for like participating in a crowd and would have by now would have served out a sentence. President Pendarovsky singled out this one defendant from the entire group and gave him a limited pardon. He's not being released immediately, but a limited pardon, while everybody else remains in prison. So it's very notable that it's the only Albanian in the group that's receiving a pardon. And even after Pendarovsky himself said that he does not consider the charges against the defendants of terrorism, that the charge of terrorism is borne out. He said it's ridiculous. And he has the pardon power, and he does not use it against. They're trying to cut. He's trying to haggle with it. There are some deals apparently being made with VMRO, trying to have, we'll release them, but you do this for us. They're holding the defendants hostage. And there is apparently a deal being made, which the Albanians insist on, that once the defendants for the April 27th storming of the parliament are released, that at the same time we should release the group of actual terrorists who attacked the city of Kumanovo on May 9th, 2015, the Albanian terrorists. And, I actually said, okay, let's release them all on the condition that the Albanians are sent to Ukraine to join the legion, which is being, they would love it. I'm sure they would love it there, and we can, it can be a win-win situation for everybody.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, that was a good rundown on that. We will see. Too bad that, real briefly, and then I got to run. We got to close out. I do think there is some goodness in President Pendarovsky. I think he could be good for Macedonia if he would do the right thing.
I don't know. A police stool pigeon.
On that note, gosh, again, we tried to start off on a high note, and then you dump all over it.
Just keeping it real.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this up, get this up online, and then I guess we'll talk again probably after the census results come out.
Yeah, definitely.
And analyze those. And what's that?
That's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it will be. So that's next week. Okay. All right. Well,
we might have, to end on an optimistic note, we might have better protection for our national identity in this country once we are a minority, because under the Constitution you're not allowed to. The minority groups have extra voting power in Parliament, especially on issues of renaming, identity, culture, etc. So it does not apply to the Macedonians now as a majority, but if the numbers are massaged enough, we can actually claim this protection.
How optimistically perverse. So, oh, well, that just goes back to what we said earlier about everything being upside down and left is right and right is left. And, we'll see. All right. Okay. Good catching up with you.
You too, buddy. Take care.
You too.